Senator J.D. Vance and Governor Tim Walz went head-to-head on Tuesday night for the vice presidential debates. Which candidate won the night on substance and performance? We'll talk about that today. Plus, Hurricane Helene has devastated many places in the southeastern United States. Lives and whole towns have been lost. But there's a whole lot to the story that you need to hear. Welcome to episode 50. I'm Blake Watson, and this is We the Free. One of the best ways you can help our show, other than by sharing today's episode, is by picking up some We the Free merch at wethefreeshow.com. You can be the salt and light you were meant to be by wearing the Salt and Light shirt, or by sipping your coffee from the Salt and Light mug, or you can sport the God Bless America shirt and the We the Free crest tee. We've got stickers and a Smells Like Freedom candle, so check out our merch today at wethefreeshow.com. Ladies and gentlemen, freebies, one and all, welcome to the 50th episode of We the Free. I can promise you it definitely feels like 50 episodes. It actually feels like I've done 100 episodes, but here we are. Welcome to the semi-centennial episode. We're also about one month away from the election. In fact, we're 32 days away now. That's the part that doesn't feel real to me. Nevertheless, we are less than 5 weeks away from America's most important election in our relatively short history. This is why I took last week off to publish special content to quash misinformation and disinformation to help voters be accurately informed on the two candidates and their parties and their policies. All of this was a consequence of something I deduced from the polling data and the research, which quite clearly demonstrated the conservative path to victory is easily outlined in 4 steps. Number 1, shore up conservative support because Trump lacked 25% of it. Number 2, gain the support of moderates and freer thinking liberals because they constitute more than a third of the electorate and demonstrate an openness to Trumpian policy. Number 3, define Harris and Walz. Show people who they really are, not who they now profess to be or who the media proclaim them to be. And 4th and finally, illustrate the distinction, the difference between Trump's first term and Harris's current term, the potential difference between Trump's future term and Harris's as well. Well, that's what I set out to do with the last several episodes, but especially episode 49, Split Screen America, in which I used their answers from the debate to accomplish those 4 goals. The difficult part was in presenting the material in such a way so as to be informative without the stench of bias. And the problem with that is objective truth. The truth is not subjective. You can't make it whatever you want. Relativism is a house of cards which collapses upon itself at the first wind of objective reality. But in today's postmodern relativistic age of information, when you actually do your research and you verified the information and then you share what you've discovered with the world, if the facts don't align with someone else's feelings, you get castigated and ridiculed as biased and propagandistic. So, I have received a litany of negative comments labeling me as such: biased, propagandistic, a liar, getting my information from Fox News. The absurdity is that I literally know that they've watched no more than maybe 6 minutes of a segment. They're operating on what they've either learned from social media or the mainstream media, and then the pot calls the kettle black. I replied to one person, I despise Fox News, and I asked them to point out one single thing that I've lied about. And of course, they never respond. None of them do. I point out the viewer data because I know that if they had watched the entire segment and had checked everything that I said, they would not have left such accusatory comments. But you see, these people represent a third of the electorate. If I can change their minds, great, but I don't have my hopes up. The objective is not only to equip you all with information to go out and be the salt and light, it's also to persuade those who deem themselves moderate or independent. One of my monologues from months ago, explaining the political strategy of two Marxist professors, Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven, is currently my top trending video on YouTube. It's getting thousands of views and comments. If you're a listener, this was in episode 29. The comments are really interesting on this video. I got this comment, and it's comments like these that give me some level of hope and encouragement, because if I'm honest, the onslaught of negativity from the left can sometimes get burdensome, but then a comment like this comes along as encouragement, and I hope it also encourages you as well. The user's handle is Abstract Realms with a Z, and they said, "I stumbled onto your channel, glad I did. This is interesting. This is where we are now. I'm a lifelong woke Democrat. Now I'm actually awake. I'm voting for Trump." Now, I know any leftist that's listening will say, that's totally made up. But you can go read the comments yourselves. But I share that with you as an encouragement to continue fighting the fight. Stand on the truth, now through Election Day and forevermore. So, I made a 2-hour special demonstrating the policies of both candidates in regard to the top 8 issues for Americans, according to Pew Research. Then I produced 8 separate pieces for you to share. Those have been released every 3 days. So far, 5 of those have been published. They're coming out in order of importance. For example, the economy is the top issue to Americans in this election, so that piece came out first. There was a piece on healthcare, then a piece on SCOTUS, then a piece on foreign policy, and yesterday or Wednesday was the 5th piece on violent crime. We've got 3 more coming out. The next one releases this Saturday or Sunday on immigration, and next week the final 2 on gun policy and abortion. Those will complete the process. Share that content. Get the word out. We've got a fight to fight, because this election, if all the polling is accurate, will be very close. Very close. We can't sit back and relax. We can't allow ourselves to think that Trump's got this one in the bag, because he doesn't. We can't make the fabled mistakes of the hare in this race with the tortoise. It's imperative that we sprint across the finish line, and that's what we're going to continue to do today. Let's begin with just a summary of the vice presidential debate. I'm not going to do a full analysis of the VP debate as I've done with the 2 presidential debates that we've had this year. The first debate was obviously very consequential. Biden was pushed out pretty swiftly after that, which I think was the plan all along. That's why it was historically very early, like much earlier than debates usually are. They needed enough time to transition away from Biden and on to Harris. They needed enough time to prepare Harris for her debate. However, that debate didn't move the needle much at all, the debate between Trump and Harris. This debate between Senator J.D. Vance and Governor Tim Walz will have relatively no impact either. But let's remember something really important here. In journalism and politics, and you may have heard something like this from Dan Bongino, there's a really hyperbolic but simplifying statement that campaigns and elections are determined by or defined by snapshots and sound bites. And I would say that that's truer today than ever. It isn't the sole defining factor, but without question, a major factor. In 2020, there were two presidential debates. The first debate was September 29th, 2020. The second debate got canceled. The last debate was October 22nd, 2020. What do you remember about those two debates? Don't look anything up. Just think about it. Unless you have, a photographic or just an impeccable memory, you don't remember anything about the second debate. But most of you probably remember the first one. It was on Fox News. It was moderated by Chris Wallace, who is now on CNN. Trump came into the debate prepared for the 2012 version of Joe Biden, who interrupted then candidate Paul Ryan 82 times during their debate. Just interrupted him, talked over him 82 times. So Trump came in ready for that fight, that kind of fight. And the Biden team smartly played it cool. So Trump was bullish, but Biden was, he was no saint either, but the moderator couldn't keep it under control. It was crazy. In the end, Trump looked like a mess, and what happened? He lost. That same year, Vice President Mike Pence debated Kamala Harris on October 7th, 2020. On substance, Mike Pence did a terrific job. He spoke well, he answered well, but two measly things overshadowed his entire performance. Kamala's "if you'll let me finish, I'm talking," and a fly landing on his head. Trump and Pence lost, and Biden-Harris won, in part because of those snapshots and sound bites. Why is Joe Biden no longer the nominee? Snapshots and sound bites. Why are the media and the DNC having such a difficult time boosting Harris's numbers? Snapshots and sound bites. I never said this 2 weeks ago, but by this standard, do you know who actually won the debate between Trump and Harris? Look, it was 90 minutes of back and forth. But what was the biggest snapshot or soundbite from that debate?
They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. Eat the cat, eat the cat. They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. Eat the cat, eat the cat. They're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. Eat the cat, eat the cat. Eat the cat, eat the cat.
That soundbite was remixed into a dance song for TikTok. I just played you the original video, which has more than 250,000 likes. It's been used for nearly 80,000 different videos, like people using the audio in their own video. It was trending on the platform. Tell me what else was said at the debate. This was like the fly on Pence's head. This was like Ronald Reagan's age remark to Walter Mondale in their debate. It frustrated a lot of conservatives and Republicans for what he said, but it catapulted the issue to far more people who were ignorant to the real situation in Springfield. And no, I'm not just talking about the consumption of pets and animals. I'm talking about the 1,500% increase in Medicaid enrollment, rising unemployment, rent prices up 30%, and wages down by at least 7% just in Springfield. And all of that is directly attributable to the CHNV program of mass paroling these 15 to 20,000 Haitian people. Springfield is an icon for the whole of the migration problem in the United States. Millions more were exposed to this fact because Trump gave them a soundbite to work with. Was there any soundbite or snapshot in the VP debate this week between Vance and Walz. Let's see. The VP debate hauled in 43 million viewers compared to 67 million for the Trump-Harris debate. In similar fashion, though, the network and their moderators were helpful to the Democrat candidate. After a topical question, the moderators would ice the cake with some sort of remark to refute something Vance said, even though they apparently agreed not to fact check during the debate. Vance would say something, and instead of just an outright fact check, the moderators would then turn to Tim Walz and say, "Senator Vance says this. What do you think about that?" They were mocking him, and it was clear from their tone and the looks on their faces. So let's review some of their statements. Walz said, "It's dangerous for Trump to be in charge when the world is this dangerous." Vance summarized this propaganda as Donald Trump as some sort of agent of chaos, and he rightly pointed out the world feared or respected the United States when Trump was in charge. He later made the point that Donald Trump is the only president who didn't have any new conflicts break out while in office. Fact check, true. Trump did not initiate a war or a military conflict during his presidency, unlike his predecessors who either started or escalated conflicts. But Trump did authorize military actions, including missile strikes in Syria. He also continued existing engagements like Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. But Vance is correct to point to Trump's first term. I've been saying this all along, and Vance mentioned it twice throughout the night. We already know President Trump. He's already been the president. We have the records. We know what it was like. The world was a significantly more stable and secure place when he was in charge. Yet Kamala Harris and Tim Walz pretend like that history doesn't exist. On the subject of climate change, Vance made a great point about carbon emissions, saying that Harris's current leadership has led to more emissions around the world. The moderators questioned Vance about the potential separation of families and children in the Trump-Vance plan of mass deportation. Vance said the family separation problem is not a concern of deportation. It's a current symptom of Harris's border policy. That was a great point because it pinpoints the explanation of why we've been separating children from adults at the southern border for the last 3 presidents. Vance explained that children are used as drug mules. They're trafficked through the border, like human trafficking. They're taken advantage of to get adults across the line with whom they share no actual relation. And no, that's not every single circumstance, but what an incredible flipping of the script on that issue related to immigration. Tim Walz tried to use the least of these verse from Matthew 25:40 to justify their position on immigration. Now, don't get me started on Tim's church, Pilgrim Lutheran Church in St. Paul, Minnesota. You can look that up for yourselves. But this is the typical position of the so-called liberal Christian, or what I call neo-Christianity. To them, Jesus was the prime social justice warrior. That's what he is. He came to elevate the oppressed and the marginalized people of his day. They don't care anything about Jesus' outspoken positions on spiritual salvation, repentance, sin, good and evil, etc. If they had any sense at all, they would know that Jesus' parable in Matthew 25 speaks to helping those that need help, not some socialized program of providing for millions of moochers to our own deprecation. Forget spiritual wisdom. That just defies common sense and sound logic. The invocation of Scripture to demonstrate compassion is rich, coming from someone who promotes the mass murder of children in the womb and the abuse of children in the sick and twisted game of transgenderism. Vance made a good point on Harris's economic policy. Why not now? She's currently in office. Why hasn't she had these great ideas for the last 4 years? Why not now? He also pointed to Trump's first term to diminish concerns about his economic plans because they've just been doomsdayers about Trump getting into office. In my piece on their respective economic plans, I was criticized for being a propagandist for Trump. They didn't listen to everything that I said because if they had, they would have heard me criticize Trump's spending. In fact, we need to talk about spending for a second. Towards the end of his presidency, Bill Clinton had a relatively balanced budget. Yet, his overall 8-year administration added $1.4 trillion to the national debt. George W. Bush's 8-year administration added $5.8 trillion to the debt, and this was mainly from the war on terror. Barack Obama's 8-year administration added $9.3 trillion to the national debt. And even if you remove the stimulus and the bailout spending from the recession, it's still $7.5 trillion in overspending. Now listen to me. Trump's 4-year, not 8-year administration added $7.8 trillion to the national debt. That's less than President Obama, but in half the time. However, almost half of that was COVID spending. If you subtract all of Trump's COVID relief spending and stimulus, that brings his number down to $4.3 trillion in debt. That's just about consistent with what Obama spent in 4 years and what Biden and Harris have spent in 3.5 years. They have overspent $4.3 trillion. All of this, all of it, is inflationary. Every bit of it. All of those presidents I just listed for you and their deficit spending, every bit of that amounts to inflation. Walz at one point said, Trump created the trade deficit with China. It was actually the opposite. That's why Trump instituted the tariffs. In the middle of his term, our trade deficit with China was over $419 billion. We were losing $500 billion to them in trade. We were buying $419 billion more in Chinese goods than they were American. The tariffs were a way to put an end to that. The U.S. would make more money, and American producers would make more, not immediately, but over time with tariffs. That's what would happen. It's what needs to happen. We need more of our stuff to be made in America. And if the dock workers are not able to reach a deal with their agency, you're really going to feel the impact of that next year. But Walz says Trump created the trade deficit with China when actually he was attacking the deficit with China. See, these people can talk all they want, but they're not America first. Yes, there are pros and cons to trade. Trade is good in the sense that it gives us export wealth and bargaining and leverage, but you are really about to experience the cons. When the two of them were giving their answers on the economy, Vance showed what a great tactical debater he was when he pitied Walz's job of having to play proverbial whack-a-mole, saying that he has to criticize Trump's fantastic economic policy, avoid the currently terrible policies, and champion the future policies being offered by his running mate in Kamala Harris. And speaking of China, Walz gave a terrible, terrible answer. It was the worst answer of the whole night on his own relationship to China. The question was about an apparent disparity in the timeline and his statements about being there in China during the Tiananmen Square protests and massacre. He didn't clarify that. In fact, he didn't answer the question at all. I'll show you the clip in a moment, but first I want you to know why he didn't answer the question. On Monday this week, September 30th, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, issued a subpoena to the Department of Homeland Security, seeking validation on information that was gathered from an alleged whistleblower. We've got the subpoena and the letter from the Oversight Committee. Take a look or listen. The Committee on Oversight and Accountability has conducted a government-wide investigation of how federal agencies are addressing the infiltration and influence campaign to weaken and corrupt the United States undertaken by the Chinese Communist Party. This infiltration and influence tactic is one facet of a larger Cold War the CCP utilizes in its unrestricted warfare against America, which the CCP considers its, quote, main enemy. During its briefings with over 20 federal agencies in its investigation, the committee has learned of the emphasis the CCP has placed on influencing subnational government leaders, including state governors. Along those lines, the committee has recently received whistleblower disclosures informing the committee of serious concerns among Department of Homeland Security personnel regarding a long-standing connection between the CCP and Minnesota Governor Timothy James Walz. Specifically, through whistleblower disclosures, the committee has learned of a non-classified Microsoft Teams group, a group chat among DHS employees titled NST NFT Biweekly Sync that contains information about Governor Walz that is relevant to the committee's investigation. The committee has also learned that further relevant information regarding Governor Walz has been memorialized in both classified and unclassified documents in the control of DHS. And it goes on to the specifics of their goals, etc. But it's fairly widely known by journalists that Walz has quite the history with China, and yes, even the Chinese Communist Party. He's made over 30 trips to China, which includes his honeymoon and annual student trips. The CCP even paid for one of these trips in the 90s. We also know Governor Walz was once a fellow at Macau Polytechnic University. That's a school in China which actively supports the CCP's global development strategy. Walz even said the name of the initiative in the debate. It's the Belt and Road Initiative. This seeks to enhance China's international trade and global influence. The fact that this subpoena was issued on Monday, the day before the debate, has me guessing that the Harris-Walz team was prepping China Tim on how to respond to a question about this. Well, he inadvertently tells on himself here. Watch.
Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect, and I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything, many times I will talk a lot, I will get caught up in the rhetoric, but being there the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID, and I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community, and then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Oof, that was really uncomfortable. In fact, that's probably the most awkward moment I could remember in a debate. I mean, he talked for 2 minutes and forgot what the question was. And then he struggled to answer the question again after the moderator pressed him for an answer. And on that note, every question to Governor Walz was a softball question, including this one. Yet it was a swing and a miss. He was trying too hard to dispel all the China rumors, and instead of hitting the softball to get on base, he threw up on home plate and the umpires. On abortion, Walz dodged the 9-month question. They asked if he supported abortions in the 9th month. He said, that's not what the bill said. In other words, I'm not going to answer, which is to say, yes, I do support that. Also, what he said is misleading. Last year, Minnesota passed the PRO Act, that stands for Protect Reproductive Options, which established a fundamental right to reproductive freedom, including the right to obtain an abortion. All of these so-called rights and labels are non-existent or fraudulent at best, but here's the rub. The bill doesn't place any specific restrictions on the timing of an abortion. So it doesn't say that you can't have an abortion in the 9th month, but you can if you want to. They even got rid of wait periods and parental consent and made Minnesota an abortion destination state. Governor Walz recycled the overly repeated lie about Project 2025. He disagreed with the fact that Vance called them pro-abortion. He said, no, we're not. We're pro-women. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to say something about this every single time it comes up. Leftists always skirt the fact that there is another body. They say it's not your choice if it's not your body, or my body, my choice. Well, there's another body here. There's another person here. What if the baby is a girl? You're not pro-woman then? Walz also lied about Amber Thurman. That's a story in the news recently. She did not die because she couldn't get an abortion. That was the story they concocted to further their diabolical abortion agenda. No, Amber Thurman died from taking the abortion pill. And they really don't want you to know that. Now, on that same subject, I felt like this was Vance's weakest subject. He was trying too hard to straddle the fence on the issue without frustrating conservatives and liberals alike, but this proves the point that I've been making for months. They are desperately trying to garner the support of moderates and independents and probably even women and even pull over some freer thinking liberals specifically on this subject of abortion. Abortion is the least important issue in the top 10 issues for Trump supporters. It's the 8th most important issue for moderates and independents, and it's one of the most important issues for Democrats and liberals. Later, on the subject of gun violence, Vance blamed the influx of illegal firearms on Kamala's immigration policy. Then he likened the Harris-Walz gun control policy to something as ineffective as waving a magic wand, saying that criminals would still possess their weapons in the end. And that is a fantastic counterpoint. But what's odd is that over the last month, Harris and Walz have both been bragging about owning guns themselves. It's been really bizarre to hear them say that. Yet it gets comical when they try to say that we need gun control and we need to protect the Second Amendment. That's like saying we need speech control and we need to protect the First Amendment. It doesn't make any sense. Walz said something about the lack of gun violence in Finland, even though they have high gun ownership. That's a really poor comparison. The United States owns more guns per capita than anyone else. We possess over 120 guns per 100 people. Finland is 10th with 32 guns per 100 people. The gun-related homicide rate in America is just over 4 per 100,000 people. 4 per 100,000. And do you know where the U.S. falls on a global list of gun-related homicide rates? 10th. 10th place with that 4 per 100,000. First place is El Salvador with 37 per 100,000. It's almost 10 times more dangerous in El Salvador. The second place is Venezuela, then Honduras, then Jamaica, then Mexico, then Brazil, then Colombia, then Guatemala, then South Africa, and then us. That's the top 10. The real question the moderators should be asking, and that people should be asking, is why is there rising gun violence in America? Why? Vance rightly pointed to the location of the vast majority of gun violence crimes and cases, the never-ending crimes committed in big cities where crime is not punished, where poor economies push people to take desperate measures. Mental health has to be at an all-time low, and why is that? I mean, I can easily answer that question. Can you, Tim Walz? They always want to talk about mass shootings and school shootings, but they never want to talk about the weekly, mundane gun violence in blue cities and states like Tim Walz. The moderates and liberals need to ask themselves why that is. Why don't they want to talk about it? Why are the vast majority of gun crimes ignored by the mainstream media and mainstream politicians? Why are only the emotional stories used to pitch gun control? I'd love to hear from you, but I can tell you what I think. I think your diabolical puppet masters would love nothing more than to rid the populace of the last line of defense against a tyrannical, revolutionary regime. Tim Walz says, well, everybody, sometimes the problem actually is the gun, as if guns just fly out of the case or the store and start shooting people. Poverty, criminal gang affiliation, mental health, spiritual depravity, the decline of organized religion, the destruction of the family, the publication and magnification of killers. These are the contributors to rising gun violence. That's why it's going up. And do I need to point out that it's been 2 crazed leftists who have used guns which they legally obtained to try and assassinate President Trump? They talked a fair amount about housing and prices. Harris and Walz want to build millions of affordable houses. They want to give out $25,000 for every first-time home buyer, if that's not inflationary. Trump and Vance want to build houses, but they want to lower housing and rental prices by deporting millions of illegals and deregulating multiple industries which affect housing, which includes lower energy costs, which, as you know, affects everything, like lumber, for example. And on that note, There's something that I've been theorizing about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Everyone in the mainstream left is describing the housing crisis. And I'm even hearing it from our local politicians here in Tennessee. I've been studying the mass migration and immigration crisis for the last year plus. And then something hit me over the last couple weeks. As of 2021, the birth rate in the United States was 11.4 per 1,000. The death rate was 9.3 per 1,000. So birth rate over death rate, 11.4 over 9.3, gives us a birth to death ratio of 1.22. In other words, for every American death, there are 1.22 births. I know that sounds weird, but just stay with me. Those numbers alone, by themselves, demonstrate a steady amount of citizens. Okay? However, statistically, the U.S. naturalizes around 700,000 to 1 million legal immigrants every single year. And that's been the case for a long time. We take in 1 million new U.S. citizens. So when you factor in those numbers, the U.S. citizenry grows by nearly 1 million each year. And this is really just generalizing, but hear me out. That should mean that we need, a minimum of 500,000 to 1 million more places to live, homes, apartments, etc. The U.S. has handled that situation just fine for decades. There are so many building companies in America. Some of the biggest ones, like D.R. Horton, they build 80,000 homes a year. And in America, there are almost 100,000 home building companies. So why do we suddenly have a crisis? And this was the light bulb for me. Because over the last 3.5 years, more than 10 million people have come into the country legally, through temporary protective status, mass parole, or illegally as gotaways or something. And they've got to have somewhere to stay. They've got to have somewhere to live. Just let me know what you think about that. But speaking of, there was also one moment when the moderators wanted to move on to a different subject after the subject of Springfield, Ohio came up. Here's how that went.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn out of the economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
The rules were that you guys weren't going to
we're
fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own leadership.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Just to be clear, Margaret Brennan was trying to minimize the crisis by saying, well, all of these Haitians are here legally. But that's misleading because it overlooks the real problem that we've talked about the last 2 weeks. Vance was on the right track in talking about the CBP One app, which has expedited the admission process for more than 591,000 people since January of last year. What Vance should have focused on instead was the CHNV mass parole program that Biden and Harris created in 2021. That's what's admitted around 434,000 Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans into the United States under temporary protective status. That's the legal version of mass asylum. Springfield perfectly demonstrates the problem with mass migration and mass asylum. And again, I'm not talking about the eating cats and dogs. I'm talking about the unbearable weight on public systems, the severe unfairness to Americans, the rising costs in rent, the inflationary support. But CBS doesn't want you to know that. The left doesn't want you to know that. That's why they muted Vance's microphone. So those are the highlights. But in summary, the debates for Trump and then Vance were the beginning of a story and the end of a story. The two of them told a whole story together. And it was almost like Vance was the Cliff Notes version of Trump's debate performance. He did a great job of supplementing his answers. Like, he would get the question and he would start by inputting other information to kind of preface his actual answer to the question, and then fill out the rest of his time with the answer. And he was better spoken than Trump. And Walz was better spoken than Harris. The VP debate was far more coherent than the presidential debate. But the main takeaway is you saw tonight why Vance was Trump's VP selection. Also, it seemed to me like one of the Harris-Walz strategies in this debate was to drive a wedge of separation between Vance and Trump. And I'm not sure what to think about that yet. They kept trying to say, in other words, look, JD, we know you're a good guy, but this Trump guy, orange man, bad. And I just haven't fully processed that yet. I think Vance performed better than Walz, and many of the mainstream liberal outlets even agree with me, like the New York Times. But how did he measure up to our 4 points to victory? Did he shore up conservative support? Well, we'll see, but I'm going to guesstimate that this will fill out the conservative ticket. Why? Because Vance represents everything that the old Republican Party loves that they feel Trump lacks. Vance has the presidential behavior that Trump lacks. When Trump attacks his opponent, it feels like a New Yorker slinging mud. When Vance attacks his opponent, it feels like a presidential debate. That's going to satiate the old Republicans and fill out the conservative base. Second, will anything Vance said draw in moderate, independent, or even liberal support? Well, again, we'll see, but to that, I would say maybe. Vance further clarified some confusing economic policies, which is the top issue. He clarified Trump's ambiguous concepts of a plan, positions on healthcare, the second most important issue for moderates. On violent crime and immigration, that's 2 more top issues for moderates. Vance made it clear that our problems with those 2 issues are attributable to Ms. Harris. But we'll see. Charlie Kirk posted a couple things on X worth quoting here. He said, yes, the base loved JD's performance last night, but most importantly, the VP debate allowed soft Republicans to come home. And by that, he means people that are essentially moderate. It's the only takeaway that's a big deal. Trump just solidified his center-right base of support. My moderate never-Trumper friends are currently blown away at how reassuring they find JD Vance, getting blown up with texts. The base already loves him. This is politics by addition. Boom. Did he define Harris and Walz? I don't think he did any more than Trump has, and that could be a problem here. If you're moderate watching that debate, you could understand that Harris and Walz have bad policies, but what people must understand is that they're intentionally bad. Trump is known for calling a spade a spade. Vance was being quite pleasant. Harris and Walz are radically far left, and the American people need to know that. Did he paint a distinctive picture of Trump's presidency versus Harris's vice presidency? Did he illustrate a distinctive future between the 2 sides? I think he did succeed on that goal. Tim Walz did not do a terrible job the whole time. In fact, I would say that he did an okay job participating in the debate. But, campaigns and elections are all about snapshots and sound bites. I can critique the substance, And it's worth it for us to have these conversations, but a large segment of the electorate will gauge this whole debate by the snippets they see online. So, what will they see online over the next week? They'll see two things. Tim Walz misspoke and said that he's become friends with school shooters.
So I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time.
Yeah. And then, of course, his totally botched answer on China. The question was about the discrepancy in his statements on being in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square protests and massacre. He didn't answer the question. He rambled for 2 minutes about just visiting China and why. Let me know what you think in the comments, and let's get to the news feed. Dear Lord, there is so much going on in the world today that we need to talk about. So let's get to the top story this week, other than Tuesday night's debate, is Hurricane Helene. This hurricane was the strongest hurricane on record to hit the Big Bend region in Florida. It has been the deadliest hurricane for us since 2017. That was Hurricane Maria. And the deadliest in the mainland United States since 2005. That was Hurricane Katrina. Helene made landfall on Thursday, September 26th, and by the next day it had degenerated to a post-tropical cyclone over Tennessee. However, the ensuing storm after that dumped biblical amounts of rain on eastern Tennessee and the Carolinas, Georgia, and Virginia. The result, hundreds of people have been discovered dead, with 3 times that amount still missing. Whole towns have been destroyed. A week later, many places are still without electricity, food, water, shelter, and communication. And we can already see more hurricanes coming because this is hurricane season coming over the next month. You know, we have an entire agency in the federal government created specifically for moments like this. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, exists to respond to disasters that overwhelm state and local resources. Now get this, FEMA's budget for 2024 is $32.8 billion. $32.8 billion. According to FEMA's numbers at FEMA.gov, as of October 3rd, 2024, over 300,000 Americans have applied for FEMA assistance in the wake of this hurricane. So, what is our federal government doing for them?
And the federal relief and assistance that we have been providing has included FEMA providing $750 for folks who need immediate needs being met, such as food, baby formula, and the like. And you can apply now for anyone who's watching this who has been affected.
$750 is not a new amount. That is a standard amount FEMA doles out in disaster relief, and that's capped by their own statutes and regulations. What exactly will $750 get you in a disaster zone? Well, we have over 300,000 applications. So $750 times 300,000 is about $235 million. Yes, FEMA's budget is broken into categories like disaster relief, preparedness grants, emergency operations, etc. But $235 million is less than 1% of their overall budget. This is what the acting president had to say.
And we've given them all everything we have. We're on the ground ahead of time, so we're working hard.
Are there any more resources the federal government could be giving them?
No, we've given them, we have pre-planned a significant amount of it, even though they didn't ask for it yet. Hadn't asked for it.
They're doing and giving everything they can, mumbles the commander-in-chief. Here's what they've done, and this is according to FEMA.org. More than 1,500 FEMA personnel are on the ground. They have shipped over 9.3 million meals, 11.2 million liters of water, 150 generators, and more than 260,000 tarps. Coincidentally, FEMA is a federal agency within the Department of Homeland Security. So they fall under the authority of the dishonorable Alejandro Mayorkas. Have you noticed he seems to be at the center of nearly every problem in America? Here's what he told the Associated Press on Thursday. We are meeting the immediate needs with the money that we have. We are expecting another hurricane hitting. FEMA does not have the funds to make it through the season. Now, there are countless stories and quotes I could bring to you today to illustrate the federal government's lack of presence in these communities, spoken by local officials in almost every one of these states. I'm also not going to use today's story for political purposes by showing you how Donald Trump immediately showed up to visit these places, how he helped bring Starlink services to North Carolina and Georgia, which we will get to later, or how Biden and Harris are invisible. That's not my focus today. I don't want to talk about how Biden has been on the beach during this time and how Kamala Harris is doing fundraisers. To all of the moderates and independents watching or listening, this is why so many millions of Americans are furious this week. This is why we talk about America First policy. And it's why we bemoan the immigration crisis and the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So many citizens of the United States can feel the literal effects of their national government putting them last. Our problem is not chiefly the response rate. What Americans see are the billions that we're spending on people that are not even Americans. Whether that be migrants or Ukrainians. And this is where the story gets darker. The Federalist reports, the Biden-Harris administration took more than $1 billion tax dollars that had been allocated to the agency responsible for American disaster relief and used it to offer services for illegal immigrants. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, allocated nearly $364 million in the fiscal year 2023 and $650 million for the 2024 fiscal year to the Shelter and Services Program to provide humanitarian services to non-citizen migrants following their release from the Department of Homeland Security, according to the government's website. Now, you just juxtapose that with the statement from Mayorkas saying that FEMA needs more money. Compare that $1 billion for non-citizens to the $235 million for Americans whose lives have been devastated and destroyed by the worst mainland hurricane we've seen since Katrina. Listen, I don't care what the Shelter and Services Program does. If we're not taking care of our own, if we're not prioritizing Americans, then what are we even doing? That would be like when you were growing up in your parents' home and you're barely getting by. And it's because your parents, the people that are responsible for the family, gave most of their money to another family down the street. The analogy gets even more weird and extreme when we can consider Ukraine. It would be like your family taking the funds that they need to feed you all and take care of you and sending it to another country. It's upside down, the whole situation. Now watch this. Here's what's going to happen. I'm predicting the future here. They are going to call for an emergency session of Congress because Congress isn't supposed to reconvene until after the election. They're going to call an emergency session to pass more funding for FEMA. Now that you know they've been stealing funds from American disaster relief to support illegal immigrants, Congress controls the power of the purse. So call up your congressman or congresswoman and tell them not to fund them another penny until they cease this America Last policy. It gets even worse when you find on the FEMA website their top 3 goals. Are you ready for this? Goal number 1, instill equity as a foundation of emergency management. Just like we saw with Governor Walz in Minnesota and their provision of COVID shots and therapeutics on a race-based point system, the FEMA is going to prioritize, quote, Black, Latino, and Indigenous and Native American persons, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and other persons of color, members of religious minorities, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex persons. In other words, if you're white, straight, and Christian, you're going to be pulled out of the mud last. Sorry. Their second of the 3 goals is climate resilience, which includes climate literacy, or building a, quote, foundational understanding of climate science, the impacts of climate change, and effective climate adaptation strategies. So just to recap here, the number 1 goal is equity. Number 2 is climate change. And then the third and final goal is readiness. Well, yeah, that seems about right. It does seem like, given the circumstance, like readiness was your bottom goal underneath equity and climate change. There's another damning detail about this situation for the Biden-Harris administration. 2 years ago, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's FCC denied subsidies to Starlink, which is Elon Musk's satellite service, to more than 500,000 rural Americans. Starlink is a broadband system which provides mobile signal and internet access via satellite. You can install these panels on your house or your camper. It looks like a flat satellite dish. And the Starlink constellation provides you with high-speed, low-latency internet. SpaceX basically won a bid with the government to bring high-speed internet to rural Americans, especially in the Appalachian region. This was back in December of 2020. But then they revoked that reward. It was worth nearly $1 billion in August of 2022, citing performance concerns. Well, here's what that would have provided. Take a look at this. Now, Elon shared this chart this week saying, had the FCC not illegally revoked the SpaceX Starlink award, it would probably have saved lives in North Carolina. Lawfare costs lives. Elon seems to be implying some sort of political motivation in revoking the Starlink award, and he's probably right. But what's funny is now that the Biden-Harris administration has failed, guess what they're rushing to provide? Here's a headline from Reuters. Dozens of Starlink systems deployed for Hurricane Helene by Biden administration. Well, dozens of Starlink devices is a drop in the ocean compared to the hundreds, if not thousands, of these devices that regular, everyday Americans are donating to law enforcement agencies and residents across the region. What's more is that Elon is giving all these people free service. It's free to use. One last thing I'll say about this, and it's addressing these climate change alarmists, just like the gun control lobby trotting out after a mass shooting to say, see, I told you so. The climate Green Squad is trotted out to say, see, I told you so, in the wake of Hurricane Helene. It's sickening, and it's also wickedly stupid. It really illustrates how given over people are, how depraved people have become en masse, as we see in Romans chapter 1. They say that this hurricane is a consequence of climate change, which holds that the combustion of fossil fuels has led to an unprecedented increase in greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide and methane, causing global temperatures to rise, which then leads to more frequent and severe weather events like this. Their solution is an impossible conversion to alternative energies, which requires impossible regulation and unfeasible spending. Carbon dioxide is measured as a concentration in the atmosphere at parts per million. So basically a ratio. Today, the concentration of carbon dioxide is about 420 parts per million. So for every 1 million molecules in the atmosphere, there are 420 carbon dioxide molecules per 1 million. So just for perspective, Neyland Stadium has nearly 100,000 seats. Carbon dioxide would represent 42 seats in the entire stadium. 42. Just to be clear, we're supposed to believe that combustion has elevated carbon dioxide to such extreme levels as 420 parts per mil that we now experience such severe weather events as Hurricane Helene. Now, Asheville, North Carolina, was devastated with flooding from Hurricane Helene, but they also were over 100 years ago in 1916 in the aftermath of the Charleston hurricane. What were the carbon levels back then? 30 seats. 30 seats in Neyland instead of 42. And I don't know about you, but I'm fairly certain the world is a massively different place than it was 104 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, freebies, we're almost 30 days out. We've got a lot of work to do to save our republic. My next special will be on immigration, which releases this Sunday. We'll have a lot more to talk about next time, but that's going to do it for me. What'll it be next time? We'll see. For now, go and be the salt and light that you were meant to be, and we'll see you next time on We the Free. Thanks for watching today. Listen, I want to make sure that you stay informed on the news and the biblical response to it. So do yourself and us a favor and hit the subscribe button before you go. And then we would love for you to check out WeTheFreeShow.com to grab yourself some merch to spread the word about We the Free. And we're also going to put a video on the screen that we think you'll like. Now, go and be that salt and light, and we'll see you next time.